So Maya's my new famous friend after her TikTok recently went viral.
Oh my God, I don't even want to talk about this on the pod.
It was so exciting. I kept refreshing the page. And it's so funny because you guys would not believe the amount of effort that we put into these TikTok videos for this one to go viral.
I literally minimum 3 hours to like record a TikTok, like a news episode or something like that.
Yeah.
And I did this one in 10 minutes and it just went crazy.
I know. It's because it was blowing up. And I feel like low key we predicted this.
We did, because in our O3 episode, well, maybe we should give a little bit of context. Basically, the TikTok was on DeepSeek R1, which, I mean, the entire tech world was so, like, up in arms about this.
And even,
this
like,
release.
the market reacted to that news.
Yeah. We dropped a TikTok on this, and it went crazy viral. But we actually covered DeepSeek V3 as a small portion in our O3 conversation, like, a month ago or something.
It is interesting, and I definitely want to spend some time deep diving into it even more.
Yeah, I'm honestly like halfway through the paper. It's kind of coming together. I'm no AI expert, but I really want to understand kind of the core fundamentals behind this model.
Yeah, so keep an eye out for that. We'll definitely do a deep dive into DeepSeek and their new R1 model. They also just released another model.
Yeah, Janus Pro 7B. It's a multimodal model as well.
But we have some exciting news stories lined up for you today, so let's get into it.
Welcome back to Get the Check. I'm Maya.
I'm Anika.
I'm Priya.
Today we have a packed agenda. So this week in our tech news episode, we're covering Anduril's new factory, Arsenal-1, which is located in Central Ohio. We also have Meta's new update, or maybe just Zuck's new update on content moderation. And then finally, we're reporting on the LA fires, what the economic impact is, and also how did we even get there in the first place. But to start with our first story, we have Anduril Industries, which is a defense technology company. They've announced plans to build a massive manufacturing facility called Arsenal-1, located in Central Ohio.
Yeah, so they're investing over $1 billion into this, and it's huge. It's 5 million square feet.
They're also a $14 billion company and are rumored to have $1 billion in revenue, which Palmer Luckey has basically confirmed. He's the most famous out of their 5 co-founders. If you haven't,
and I see why.
Yeah, if you haven't listened to one of his interviews, honestly, fuck this podcast. Just go watch that instead.
Wait,
it's so entertaining.
His vibe is entertaining, but also I took like one look at his picture and I was like, wait, what? This is Palmer Luckey?
Well, he's so young. He sold Oculus to Facebook when he was 20 years old for $2 billion.
Yeah. So Arsenal-1 was announced on January 16th, and their timelines are very efficient. It's something they stress as a company. They also are bringing a lot of economic benefits to Ohio. It's going to create 4,000 jobs, and that's just direct jobs. There'll be even more indirect jobs.
Yeah, there's estimates of like 8,500 jobs indirectly.
Yeah, because it doesn't take into account all the housing that needs to be built for these people and like the growth of the tech ecosystem. I think of it similarly to the way Tesla came into Austin, created their Gigafactory. That created like over 10,000 jobs. So that was at a much larger scale, but it's similar in that sense.
Yeah, already before they even started the project, it's quoted as the largest single job creation and new payroll project in Ohio's history.
Yeah, and they've basically already worked closely with Ohio state officials to get tax breaks, and they're going to continue to talk to them about what Anduril will be able to do because they've specifically picked a spot that's right next to an international airport. So I could totally see them flying their autonomous jets off of these like runways. I'm sure the Ohio officials will pay the price for the creation of 4,000 jobs.
Yeah, this also marks a pretty significant expansion in Anduril. Prior to this, their largest facilities were around 150,000 feet. And so this one being 500K obviously amps up the amount of production they're going to have. But specifically in this facility, they plan on developing what they call combat unmanned vehicles, or drones in that case.
Yeah, so we can go into their products. They've started with Lattice, which is actually a software. And I think that's important because although they do manufacture like planes and drones and stuff now, they were originally a software company. And that's what defines them. Like they brought software to the defense space when everyone else in Silicon Valley didn't want to build in defense tech.
In their Lattice software, I read that they took learnings from the autonomous vehicles industry and the machine learning vision computer programs there and applied it to Lattice, which is what is used to drive their drones and essentially have like very autonomous drones so that human operators don't need to fly these things everywhere and they can go and use these drones to like basically do surveillance on areas that like the US is trying to spy on. This is very different than the drones or aircrafts that Lockheed has built because they've pretty much always required human operators either in the plane or outside of the plane.
Yeah, no, that's true. They definitely have a really strong focus on like AI, computer vision, and they were also founded in 2017. So it's like a relatively new company compared to like how long people have been working on autonomous vehicles and things like that. To go into their drones, Ghost is their most common drone that's used right now. So they have that. They also have other things like sentry towers and surveillance towers that's used at the border, and they've really expanded into all the different realms of what you can do.
So they have the Barracuda, which is part of a missile family. Then they have the Menace, which is a utility vehicle, like a jacked up Jeep, basically.
It's actually a crazy name. It sounds like a 16-year-old named it.
Yeah,
And it's like buying it in a video game, like maybe one of the video games Maya plays. They also have the Fury, which is like an F-35 jet, but it's all unmanned. Like it's F-35 jet without a pilot, which is cool.
So Anduril acquired Blue Force Technologies back in September 2023. And when they acquired it, Blue Force actually was already designing Fury, already had in mind that it was going to be a combative drone. And so when they acquired it, basically that was a signal that Anduril was ready to move on from surveillance and go into like weapons and guns, obviously. And so now that is the whole reason why they're building this factory, is to build those.
Yeah, I mean, it's like the natural progression of this. Like you can start by saying you want to do surveillance and defense, but like the money to be made is in weapons manufacturing.
I mean, the governments want guns.
In Palmer Luckey's interviews, he has talked about how his philosophy is that he thinks the United States and like their allied powers need to have the most amount of guns. Whether you use it or not is like a separate conversation, but we need to be like prepared with our weapons, essentially.
Yeah. And historically, we have not been prepared with our weapons, which I think is what I find interesting about this news story, is it signals a shift towards the next generation of defense tech. Historically, defense contractors have had really long timelines and really poor results.
So basically, Anduril's business model is that they take R&D up front. They basically take the hit on manufacturing all of these things, and then they sell them to the U.S. governments and also, obviously, the ally governments as well. But at that point, they don't have to really compete for a contract because they're like, hey, we have this ready-made product that you can just buy. And so this has essentially forced Anduril to be a very efficient organization because they're putting up this upfront capital. But when you look at someone like Lockheed, who does defense contracts, you get paid before you even have to build the thing. Hence why Lockheed contracts take forever to actually come to fruition.
Yeah, and the other thing is they also, in their designs for Lockheed, they have to take into account like what the US military wants. So they consult with the military on exactly how it's going to be built, which we all know how fast things get done in the government. So that also just leads to like increasing timelines as opposed to Anduril taking on all the R&D and like being able to iterate as fast as they want to iterate on it.
And I will say, Anduril tries to brand themselves as a defense product and says that Lockheed, Boeing, Northrop Grumman, their competitors, are defense contractors. And I see what they mean in a way, but I also think that the line gets really muddled because like in 2024, Anduril won a contract from the US government to create these like unmanned F-35s that they call like the Fury. And they haven't built any of those like to this day. And they're planning on building them in this factory. So it's like at that point, how different are you really? And maybe you're not consulting with the government to the extent that Lockheed does, but you're definitely consulting with them a bit. Where I do think they're different is that I do think they'll deliver on timelines more like a tech startup would than the way like Lockheed would, where literally the newest ship, which is called the USS Gerald R. Ford, not as kitschily named as the Anduril ones, it took a decade and $30 billion to build.
Yeah.
How do you take a decade to build a ship?
No, it's insane. Well, there was also the thing where they had a F-35 contract and they said that they were going to deliver 145 units, and this contract was from like years ago. And then they modified it in 2024 and they were like, oh, actually it'll get done by 2027, which is the same timeline that Anduril is saying that they'll be able to deliver their jets in as well.
Yeah, I feel like when you only have a couple of players in the space, like the government is on the whims of these defense contractors unless they do it in-house, which they're not going to do. And so then what does it take for a shift to really happen? The other thing that's been happening a lot is the DoD never gets audited. There's like, what, 50 or 60 billion dollars that's just like not recorded somewhere?
Basically, the DoD technically has gotten audited every year for the last 7 years, but then every time the audit comes out, it basically just says it resulted in a disclaimer of opinion, which is a nice way of saying they failed. And the funny thing is, I feel like I've looked at these F-35 timelines for like years now, and every single year, like whether it's 2018 or 2024, you can Google problems with F-35s and a new problem will come up. And when I Googled it for this pod, some of the new ones cannot fly in lightning, which is literally crazy because every commercial plane can fly in lightning.
Yeah.
And instead of fixing it, they basically issued a rule that they just won't have any of the new F-35s fly within 25 miles of a storm.
Oh, wow.
No
So
war
it's
if
like,
there's a storm.
Oh shit, there's a storm in Ukraine. I guess we'll just leave them to fend for themselves. Like, what?
Yeah, I do want to be still aware of the fact that like it is rocket science to build an F-35. Like it's not the easiest thing in the world. And I don't want to diminish that technology, but at the same time, like these defense contractors need to be held to higher standards. There's just no penalty for them delivering late because there's not enough players in the space. And so they can just control the timelines that they want.
Yeah, defense contractors are straight up manipulating the American public because they like strategically put factories similar to the one we're talking about, like Arsenal-1, in key swing states, which is like a documented thing. And it's basically like blackmail in making the politicians in those places vote for their budget in the next year. Last year, we literally spent $875 billion on national defense. And to get the product we got at the end of the year, we probably could have spent way less. But if those politicians vote against those defense contracts, then defense contractors just run ads in those places saying, oh, you lost like 10,000 jobs in this city because this politician voted against our funding.
Yeah, it's just like a broken system.
Yeah.
One more thing I wanted to note is Anduril is noted for their economic efficiency. It takes a lot less money for them to build their drones. This is because they follow a very similar strategy that actually SpaceX follows, where they build everything in-house and they don't contract any of their parts out to separate contractors, or they try to minimize it. And this is because everyone's trying to make a margin on the part that they're building. If you cut all of that out and if you just do everything in-house, hire a bunch of smart people, and just try to make a margin on the final product, you're actually going to make a cheaper product because economies of scale doesn't apply here because there's not many people buying those individual parts.
It's basically like SpaceX did to NASA what Anduril is now doing to Lockheed.
Exactly.
Which is just like the next gen
Of defense.
more
It's similar to like
tech-based.
Tesla too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
all of them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that gets into what Arsenal-1 is actually doing within their factory and the technology they're using to make them so much more efficient than like Lockheed or any of these other competitors. So the key ones to call out are Arsenal-OS, which is their manufacturing intelligence. They also recently announced their partnership with Palantir. And so they're going to be using digital twin virtual factory simulation. And then the third technology is Lattice AI, which we had previously mentioned that they're going to pre-install into all of these.
Yeah. Their partnership with Palantir here really makes sense. I mean, Palantir will be able to use all the sensors in their manufacturing facilities to essentially find any inefficiencies that are occurring there. And I doubt like Lockheed and Boeing are doing anything similar.
All the founders worked at Palantir before they were at Anduril. I'm
Oh,
pretty
really?
sure. Yeah.
Okay. So this just
That
makes
makes
I mean,
sense.
it like
yeah.
totally
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, so basically what Palantir is doing is, if you listen to our Palantir episode, you would know, but they're creating a digital twin of the entire factory. So they're mapping the entire thing out from like the different materials that are being used to like
Yeah.
the actual workflows that are in place. And so by creating this entire replica, you can simulate like what if scenarios or like proactively go in and fix different things that might be broken 5 days from now. And what's really cool about this is they integrate with Arsenal-OS as well, which like real time can change manufacturing processes. So not only can you find the issue using Palantir, but then you can go deploy a fix immediately using the Arsenal-OS software.
Yeah, I feel like they're bringing the principles of tech and manufacturing together. And we haven't really seen this in a ton of other industries.
Yeah, and it's worth also talking about why the US government is investing so much in this. And yes, the new administration is probably even more bullish. Like Lucky Palmer has like really close ties with the Trump administration, but even Biden, their last contract that they won for their jets was in 2024. It was like pre this administration. So I think that the reason why the shift is happening is the US government is also increasingly concerned about actions our adversaries are taking. Like in October, Iran launched missiles at Israel and we successfully shot most of them down, but the US missiles that shot down the Iranian missiles each costed $28 million.
What?
Yeah, and guess how much the Iranian missiles costed?
What?
Literally like less than the tuition to go to Harker. They were like $50K each.
You're
Like
lying.
$50K.
But is that because of like the labor? Like it's just cheaper to build out in Iran?
I mean, I don't know how much the labor difference is, but there's no way it's the difference between $50,000 and $28 million. Like that's orders
Yeah.
of magnitude. It's because they're way shittier missiles. But a shitty
missile's a missile.
Yeah, exactly. Like a shitty missile is still a missile.
Yeah. And Lucky Palmer said that if we go to war with China, we would run out of munitions within 8 days, which is crazy. Obviously, we don't know what their military has, but you could assume that a war is going to last longer than 8 days. So
It's also like with these drones and stuff they're making, like he's creating it to be like low cost, high efficiency, just pump out as many as possible. Whereas like Lockheed and these other contractors have been getting away with like barely scraping by, putting billions of dollars into these ships and stuff. And then like maybe you have something to show for it at the end. Like you have a jet, but it can't fly through a storm.
I also think with Trump's administration, there's definitely just going to be a lot more funding for the DoD and a lot more emphasis on beefing up our military technology.
I also think there's more of an openness to tech in general and like incorporating tech into different parts of the government that like maybe they weren't traditionally a part of.
It's not as taboo to talk about military tech as it once was. Like I remember in college, like the idea of working for Palantir was like, oh my God, you're Satan. Like it was like really bad.
It's also like become cool to love America again. And part of that nationalism is being okay with defense being super forthright. Everyone agrees we need some amount of defense posturing.
Yeah.
But it's not, and I would like still put myself in this category. I'm not like super gung-ho. It doesn't like make me happy to see the creation of a bunch of offensive drones.
Yeah.
But I think now it's like way more socially acceptable to celebrate that.
Yeah. I also do think that like the efficiency that Anduril is bringing is something that is much needed. And so ideally, like the goal is we could spend less money, but have a stronger military through companies like this.
I was going to say it's kind of bipartisan, and I know it probably won't end up getting framed in that way. But like Democrats basically want to spend less on the military and Republicans want a strong military. The conversation used to be like, how do we balance the two? But in theory, Anduril's given a solution where you spend the amount the Democrats want to spend, but get the results that the Republicans want to get. And that's like everyone's best case scenario, combined with the fact that Trump, at least as of now, isn't super pro getting into wars. Best case scenario where like you're not getting into wars, but if you get into one, then you have defensive capabilities. It's just an arms race. It is worth going a little bit into the ethical concerns. The main thing I would say is that Anduril is creating unmanned drones and planes, whereas historically there's been a person there, which creates a gray area where if someone in the US military is operating an Anduril drone and then there's a machine learning algorithm in that drone that decides like, oh, you should shoot here, and then it ends up killing a civilian, historically there is accountability for decisions. Like whoever in the military makes a decision, they're accountable for that.
What happens to them in that scenario where someone's manning a drone and they do like kill a civilian?
In that case, probably nothing, but there's probably other cases.
I see it as similar to the argument of Facebook pushing content to someone who's depressed and then them committing suicide. Is it the algorithms at fault, and who's to hold responsible for that algorithm? In the same way, it's like this is the algorithm that accidentally killed the civilian, but who's to hold responsible for Anduril's algorithm?
But I think in the Meta example, it's much more indirect, and everyone's still
agrees,
you're influenced by Meta, but you're in control of your own actions. Whereas like in this case, you could argue that you were just like listening to an algorithm and doing what it told you. Like that's why there's so much conversation around how Palantir and like OpenAI and Scale are going to create like defense AI, because if you say the wrong thing, there's like actual life at risk. And in terms of accountability, I'm sure there's very little accountability for like a soldier killing a civilian in the context of war, but people get tried for war crimes. But it's like, how do you try people for war crimes in an age where like you could argue technology did it or decided?
So right now is the consensus that it's on Anduril.
If Waymos kill a person when they're driving, isn't it on Google?
Okay, so to answer Priya's question, right now the military personnel making the decision has the same accountability that they did back when these things were manned. And Anduril has said that's a good thing. I listened to one of their interviews and they're like, that's good, there should be accountability. To your Waymo question, like it's on Google, but that's also a way different scenario where they're doing everything in their power to create technology that saves lives. And they might mess up, but it's probably at a lower rate than a non-technology enabled world would mess up. But now you're creating a world where like technology can actually enable you to kill more efficiently and more accurately. And your goal could be to kill if it's offensive.
Isn't that the goal, is to be able to like kill more accurately than
more
in the
efficiently.
past?
Like the whole point is that like they're trying to not kill civilians, but kill people who are bad.
But like that's an assumption. Yes, the goal would be to kill more accurately and more efficiently, because accuracy in time of war is good, right? Like you want to avoid civilians. But I think where it breaks down is Waymo like clearly has an incentive to not kill a civilian because it would be close to the end of their brand if it can be proven that they should have taken precautions. Whereas Anduril, like they don't have an incentive to save a civilian life.
Like you're saying that if Anduril kills a civilian, you're saying that it's possible that Anduril could get off the hook way more easily than Waymo getting off the hook, because Anduril is meant to kill people. If that's used incorrectly but not audited as closely because it's just in the context of killing, then it could be very bad.
Let's say you're saying like we're only looking for Osama bin Laden. Anduril could be like, oh, we have a technology that can literally identify everyone within 6 miles of this area we know he's in. Like we'll just kill all of them. and we can do it really quickly and efficiently.
Which is similar to like what the military does today.
But like today, when a person has to pull the trigger and kill someone, it's a little bit more difficult than when you can basically play war like it's a video game and you're sitting in your home. The things that people say to us in our TikTok comments, like, could they say them to us in real life? Maybe, but it's like, how many of those people are actually going to do that? Yeah. And sure, soldiers probably still feel like some amount of humanity in most cases, killing a child, versus like, how much are you going to feel if like you're literally just like
if it's gamified.
You're just clicking accept on an AI that's already made a decision. Yeah. It's just like different. That's not a reason not to do it. Like everything's going to head in that direction anyways. I think it's just a caution that everyone has about this industry.
Well, pivoting more to Meta, Anduril and Meta are connected through Palmer Luckey.
Yeah, basically in 2020, when it wasn't cool for tech to support Trump yet, Palmer Luckey was still supporting Trump very vocally. And according to the Wall Street Journal, got fired from Meta for doing this, although Meta says it's not true. Got fired, got $100 million payout, because you can't fire someone for a political contribution. And apparently Zuck was pressuring him really heavily to support the third-party candidate.
Wait, why?
Because he just didn't want him to support Trump. It's all just really funny because now Zuck is like the biggest Trump fan after literally
He's
having
a little fanboy.
Yeah, he had to pay someone $100 million just because they wanted to like support the candidate of their choice, and now he's a fanboy.
Yeah.
I was obsessed with his little like makeover that he did for himself last year.
His perm?
Yeah. And the chain.
I'm not a fan.
Well, he kind of looked like an alien before.
He still looks like an alien.
Okay, but is it not way better?
Dude, they all look like aliens. It was like alien 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 sitting front and center in front of Trump.
Yeah, basically Zuck says he's a man now. He went on Joe Rogan and said the corporate culture is emasculated and neutered.
What?
Wait, yeah.
I didn't listen to this interview.
It was insane.
It's actually the craziest interview I've ever seen. It's like Palmer Luckey level crazy.
I feel like it's becoming a trend to just be a crazy little tech boy. Like Elon,
it's
Palmer
just, like,
Luckey,
allowed.
Zuck. Yeah. It's allowed now.
Yeah.
I feel like they all just realize that they're rich enough that they don't need to pretend to be good people.
Because they've always been like this. Yeah, Zuck's always been on one.
And if they're in Trump's good graces, like nothing will ever happen to them. Like there was a period of time where I feel like all of them were in trials with the government. But now with Trump as president, that's just not going to happen.
They're like, we're free. The DOJ is not going to go after us anymore.
The trials where like senators were asking Zuck how it's possible to make money on Meta when users don't pay a fee. And he was like, senator ads. Like,
he was trying so hard not to laugh. Yeah. So a few weeks ago now, right before Trump's inauguration, Meta said that they're getting rid of fact checkers and moving to community notes. And on top of this, they're also relaxing guidelines around certain topics that they say are part of mainstream discourse.
And on top of that, there's no more tampons in the men's bathrooms. And he says low performers are out.
Honestly valid.
She means that about the low performers, not the tampons.
Wait, my free tampons at the office are low performers. They never hold up.
But yeah, I agree. The office tampons are never good.
Yeah.
Okay, but they're free, guys.
No,
dude, that's literally proof that the office has not been feminized. Like if the office had been feminized, there would be Tampax in every corporate bathroom, and instead there's cardboard. Basically, this all started in 2016 when there was a huge push for Meta to start moderating after claims that they'd interfered with the election.
Yeah, and this was later proven to be true, but at the time, Zuck called it crazy to even propose that this was happening on his platform. But I do think it was clear at the time that this was the direction that social media was moving in, and there were no precautions that were taken at all, which ultimately led to like election interference, but also a bunch of other things that had happened in the past as well. And so as a result, in December of 2016, following the election, they said that they are going to begin flagging fake news stories with the help of users and fact checkers, which was basically just responding to all of this criticism that they got.
Yeah, and then they also tried to use AI-based content moderation. I don't think it does really well. And then third-party fact checkers. They spent about $13 billion on these tools between 2016 and 2021.
Yeah, they
have
have
like
40,000 employees.
Yeah.
90 fact checker organizations that are now all going to go under.
Yeah.
RIP.
They also had outsourced human moderators across the globe, so they're all gone too.
Well, I feel like those people just can be like the scale work for hire.
Like the scale data labelers.
Yeah.
Like one of my high school friends is actually a content moderator at Google, and they have all of these perks. They bring in like puppies and stuff because people literally
they're traumatized.
No, that's what
it's
I'm
not
saying.
a perk.
No, it's not a perk, but like Google frames it as a perk because they're like, you look at like beheadings all day, but look at this little puppy now.
Oh
Wait, maybe
my
they'll
God.
pay for therapy. It's expensive these days.
I guess your high school friend's out of a job maybe soon if Google follows the trend, but Facebook ended up moving to community notes.
So X's community notes got zucked by Zuck, but for once he actually gave credit to
Zucked by Zuck.
Like,
wait, sorry, can we stay on that a little bit more?
Like they always say like, oh, he zucked that when he like steals every feature from his competitors, but he never gives credit. And to his credit, he gave Elon a little shout out.
It's because they're boys now.
I know, he was super direct in his speech. I feel like this type of speech, like 5 years ago, you'd be out there citing like studies as to why you've changed your algorithm. He was basically just like, yeah, Biden gave me a ton of shit, and like now I can just do what Elon already does on X and use community notes.
Yeah, they're just so straightforward now. A little bit more into why community notes is posed to be better is previously people thought, okay, maybe fact checking would be the better way. But it turns out if you use the community to fact check these posts, it happens a lot faster. The core base of the problem is that you want people to fact check as fast as possible so that when people are reading it, they know it's misinformation right away before it gets too late.
Yeah, something that's interesting to talk about are these engagement life cycles and how long they last. So there was a study done at Cornell, and they found that 90% of all engagement on Facebook occurs within the first 30 hours after posting. And this study was specifically done in the context of January 6th. We all know that there was a ton of misinformation around that time spreading on all platforms, not just Facebook. So they specifically looked at Facebook and saw that they started removing content so late in the engagement cycle of when people interacted with this content that it was only going to disrupt less than 1% of predicted future engagement. And there's also studies that misinformation spreads 10 times faster than like legitimate news.
Yeah.
And so because of this, it is important to be able to like nip it in the bud as fast as possible. And that's something that doesn't always happen with fact checkers.
Something that I actually thought about when I was reading this is like, how is community notes like that much different than the comments section? Can't you just comment, hey, this is misinformation? And then like that is the community like fact checking. But I think there's something different about community notes where it's front and center on the post directly. And that kind of visibility is just better than the comment section.
Yeah, I feel like I use X the most out of the three of us. And I don't think that community notes can be compared to the comments because if you see a tweet, you pretty much see the community notes as well. Whereas I've probably seen so many tweets where I never saw the comments. And there also is a whole algorithm that goes into what is put in the community note. If like people that usually disagree, whether it's like politically, philosophically, whatever, they agree on a note, it like prioritizes that. So there's a whole algorithm behind it versus the comments that pop up are just like what has the most likes, right?
Yeah.
And so what has the most likes is actually probably going to not be what's fact checking it. It's going to be like
the people that are just willing to like have group
say the craziest thing.
Either agree or like not agree, but it's just like additional misinformation because that's what goes viral.
Yeah, it's like the echo chambers of thought.
Yeah.
The other interesting thing I saw about the X algorithm for community notes is that it's public, which actually leads to like increased trust because there is so much transparency into it. Because if you really cared to look at how this content is being moderated through community notes, you can go do that yourself.
Yeah. I read this paper by a professor named Grimmelman, and he studies a lot on content moderation, and he says, without understanding more about how platforms delineate the borders of groups or the kinds of crowd-like behaviors they designate as harmful, it's impossible to know whether they're actually content neutral. And so you really need transparency. And in that way, community notes is run by the community, but to the algorithm of like how that note gets generated is also very transparent.
I feel like when I read a community note, it is always accurate. I do think they're relatively objective and they seem to always be truthful. The one thing is a lot of studies have shown that the amount of hate speech that's been on X since they switched to that model has grown exponentially. Like a USC study found that hate speech has increased 50% and the use of transphobic statements has increased 260%, which I guess all makes sense because you are moving to something that decreases limits on what you can say. So even if there's a community note, the thing is still out there.
Yeah, because before it was probably close to zero if you have AI fact checkers just go in and like remove content.
Yeah.
Something that like I was also thinking about is Wikipedia has been a long used tool that uses community-based moderation. I know we always say, okay, like Wikipedia has to be fact checked or whatever, but I honestly treat Wikipedia as truth most of the time because of their model. And so it's like we've seen that Wikipedia has actually like skewed very correct and factual. Like, why haven't we ever tried to do something like that?
Wait, that just gave me the best idea. We should create a Wikipedia page for Get the Check.
Oh, we should.
The Wikipedia point is really fascinating because I don't know, do you guys follow Elon's tweets?
Not really.
So I do, not by choice. They just come on the feed.
That's X pushing Elon's tweets.
No, but it's so funny you bring up Wikipedia, Maya, because Elon's latest thing that he's been hating on every single day is Wikipedia.
Oh, really?
Wait, that's so
Yes.
ironic.
And he gets on X every single day and is like, no one donate to Wikipedia. They're left leaning. And he's sharing like screenshots saying that the people that edit Wikipedia tend to be more on the left and that he just hates Wikipedia.
But that's okay. That's the whole point. Do they have content moderators that they hire themselves, or like fact checkers that they have hire themselves? I thought it was all community based.
There's certain people regularly editing Wikipedia articles. And Elon's point is that they tend to be liberal, which I'm sure is true. That's just like
Yeah.
people interested in like writing and
Education.
education are gonna, like,
Education leans
skew-
left.
Yeah, education leans left. But it's funny because now that you pointed out, the philosophy behind community notes and Wikipedia is actually very similar. So it's ironic that he has so much hatred towards it.
Yeah. I feel like this is the issue with social media, is that platforms basically either lean left or lean right, and then people just organize themselves on the groups of which platform they support, but it's honestly just based on their political views too.
Yeah, totally.
One other thing I'd point out is Zuck didn't just say that they're moving towards a community notes model. He also said that a lot of things that are in mainstream political discourse, for example, like calling gay people mentally ill or making certain derogatory comments about women, are now going to be allowed on Meta, which is basically like this free speech versus hate speech debate that has gone on for as long as we know, but he's going to prioritize free speech.
Yeah. Some of the other things that have previously been censored are even topics like immigration. Like, I know a lot of the things that have been talked
Yeah.
about in the news are the more divisive things, like, is it okay to say trans people are crazy? But some of the other things that are also going to be allowed is discourse about immigration and more like politically charged topics that were previously, like, I don't know what the Facebook term is, but like shadow banned essentially from the platform in the past.
The other thing I think that people don't talk about a lot is also the freedom of association. Someone has the right to associate with any party that they want to, and it doesn't have to be a public thing. Obviously, though, with social media, when you're following, XYZ follower, or you're like reading someone's posts, like Facebook can see who you're interacting with. And so whether that be public or private, Facebook basically can determine what your association is, and it's what they do with that that's not great.
That makes sense. The one thing I do want to bring up here is that high profile celebrities and figures actually like never had to adhere to this set of guidelines on Facebook at all, which is crazy.
Priya went down this rabbit hole of looking at all these Meta pages that got leaked.
Yeah, I feel like our iMessage chat was just blowing up with screenshots of all the whistleblower
Because it's
things.
insane.
She's actually an investigative journalist, you guys.
I was going to say the Wall Street Journal did like an 8-episode series called The Facebook Files, basically on these papers that got released.
Yeah, and I'm sure there could be 100
Yeah.
given all the information.
No,
that
but
exists.
8 episodes, I think it was like 30 minutes to an hour each. Like that's a fuck ton of content.
So basically, back in 2021, Frances Hogan, who was a former Facebook product manager, shared tens of thousands of internal documents directly to the SEC. And this exposed Facebook for a ton of different things. But in relation to the conversation that we're having today, it exposed systemic failures in content moderation. There was also admissions of guilt in knowing the effects that the company was having on like society, politics. We all kind of know that they play a role, but there was actual tangible evidence that they know exactly what they're doing. So the first one that I wanted to talk about was X-Check, where basically all of these people think like Kim Kardashian, Donald Trump, all of these different both political and just like social figures in society don't have to adhere to any content guidelines, and they're allowed to say anything they want on the platform.
Well, it's because they want them to stay on the platform. Like, because if those celebrities interact with the platform, they'll get users.
It's also because when they become upset, it's a huge PR issue.
Yeah.
Even on a really small scale. I've seen so many times on X that a founder will post and be like, I had this issue with this company, or like there's this bug in this company, and within 2 seconds it's literally fixed.
Yeah.
And it's like a flex for those companies to like respond to the person and be like, bug fixed, or like money refunded. If one of us got like locked out of our Instagram,
Days.
never,
weeks.
like
Well, they
they're
don't
never
care. They don't
talking to
care.
someone.
Yeah.
Yeah. But then if it's like Kim Kardashian, obviously.
But I guess now that they're moving to community notes, everyone's on this elite status, right?
Hopefully. But I mean, at the time, Facebook also openly said that every single person was treated the same.
Even as Meta has changed their policy, there's still some restrictions on what you can do. But I think that the other interesting thing here is what is okay to say and what is not okay to say is constantly being defined by cultural norms, right? And to your point with X-Check, Meta's new chief of policy kind of alluded to that, because he made this comment that was like, it's not right that things can be said on TV on the floor of Congress yet not on Meta. And I see what he's saying, which is like, if Trump is gonna say, for example, that like immigrants are eating dogs on the presidential debate stage, but then when an everyday person says it on Meta, it gets censored, it's kind of tough, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
in order to censor the things they were censoring before, they have to censor a specific political party.
So there's Trump's famous post where he says, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. So he posted this on Facebook. He also posted it on X and other platforms. Facebook's algorithm scored this at a 90 out of 100. So it would like automatically should have been taken down. Because Trump was part of this program, not only was it not taken down, but it went up to Mark Zuckerberg to actually like give approval.
Crazy.
So it was basically in the hands of the CEO of this company.
And then did Zuck take it down?
So no, Zuck basically publicly acknowledged that he allowed it to stay up. And the manager said that making a manual decision like this seems less defensible than algorithmic scoring and actioning.
Well, that makes sense.
That makes sense, yeah.
It's crazy that the government doesn't understand social media enough to regulate it, and it's not a third-party algorithm, but it's Meta's own algorithm that's regulating itself. And then basically Zuck just wakes up one day, gets a perm, and then decides to change the entire way content is moderated on Meta.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was like a broken system before, though, because if in this scenario, the algorithm is scoring it as something that needs to be taken down, at the end of the day, he's the one that has the final word on like, no, I actually do want this to be on the platform.
Well, to your point about there needing to be a third-party algorithm that like monitors all social media platforms, this is actually something that can't happen because based on a U.S. Supreme Court case with Murphy versus Missouri back in June 2024, it held that the government can essentially persuade people to take down their posts, but they can't coerce people to take down their posts because that inhibits freedom of speech. So that's why there's no government algorithm out there that's monitoring these posts.
But isn't there like certain exceptions to freedom of speech, like if you're directly inciting violence? I haven't looked super deeply into what the government's role could be, but I do think it's a problem that the entire way our main media sources are regulated right now is up to the whims of one CEO. And you can see how much that's made an impact.
Totally.
Yeah. I mean, back in the day when you had news outlets like printing presses, right? There's only so much you could put out there. But with the use of technology, it's just like you can spread information a lot faster, a lot quicker, and can be a lot more of a weapon. And so does the Constitution, First Amendment really hold up here in this case? It's a hard conversation to have.
Yeah, I think it becomes difficult because there's so many instances of it being directly linked to violence, like even in Pizzagate where someone stormed a pizzeria with a gun because they thought Hillary Clinton's pedophile ring was in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And everyone agrees, I feel like, that there shouldn't be an absolute amount of freedom of speech on social media. Even Zuck, after saying all of these things, there's still a lot of things you can't say on Meta. And even in TikTok, we see comments get filtered out all the time.
Yeah. But it's because of the way the Constitution is written, governments have no way to regulate any sort of this thing. It's always up to the platforms and the whims of who's in power and what their moral beliefs are. So you have to basically trust your CEO and their moral beliefs on how they run the thing.
It seems like they have some ability though, right? Because if Zuck is saying Biden pressured him in 2020.
I mean, they have ability in a very lobbyist type of way, but not in an absolute way. And so what's happening though is that like these CEOs are actually acting with more power than the government can even act with.
Yeah, that makes sense because they're controlling the platform.
Exactly.
But also like their incentives are not aligned at all. Like the reason that they're able to get so rich is because they have so much engagement on their platform.
Yeah.
And like that trade-off of engagement versus like inciting.
Yeah. Like our Constitution basically hasn't caught up to like the new balance of power. Back in the 1700s, the government was the biggest form of power. Now, the way tech is run, these tech giants, these tech CEOs have more power, arguably, honestly, over the government, in my opinion. And so it's like it's left up to them. And these people are not regulated. There's no constitution that they have to abide for. It's just their personal interests. Like policy needs to catch up.
Yeah, I agree. But I do think that the government attempts to do things. They have these hearings, they have these trials. Like after 2016, there was a whole thing about how the chief product officer at Facebook basically formed a task force to see if user engagement was contributing to political polarization. And to no one's surprise, he found that they did correlate to one another. And there were like steps put in place of like what they could actually do to fix this. But then in the end, they were like, this is anti-growth. We actually don't want to do this because we prioritize our engagement metrics over everything, which like makes sense from a business perspective. But then it's like, where does everything else fall?
Tech is moving at a rate that government policy can't catch up with. And I feel like that's concerning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm saying, where it's like, you can't have the group that's going to benefit the most from engagement be regulating what can be said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it doesn't even feel like it's Meta anymore. It feels like it's literally Zuck.
Yeah, but then, yeah. I scratch my brain because I honestly don't know what the best path forward is. I would want the government to regulate these platforms, but the government has no power to regulate these platforms given the precedence of the Supreme Court case.
Yeah, that makes sense. I don't feel like I have a good solution here either. And I also think it is a legitimately difficult thing to balance free speech and then wanting to keep everyone safe. Because also, like, no one agrees on what a fact is anymore in a way, too.
Yeah.
And so that just, like, makes it difficult.
Yeah. Next up in our agenda, we have the LA fires.
2 huge wildfires started in LA on January 7th, and one was called the Palisades fire and the other is the Eaton fire, and they became 2 of the most destructive fires that we've ever seen.
And we're still seeing fires break out. So I think in total, over the last few weeks, there's been like over 200 wildfires. And the most recent one is the Hughes fire that broke out in Santa Clarita earlier this week. And that's already burned through 10,000 acres, caused over 30,000 people to evacuate. So this is not even close to a finished story.
I wanted to honestly size the economic impact, but every time I size it, the number gets greater. As of right now, when we're recording, I think the economic impact is around 400 billion, but that could still increase.
Yeah, and like living in Southern California, fire season is just something that you've learned to deal with every single year. Like I remember even when I was little that we'd have to like pack a bag and evacuate because it was just something you did.
That's actually crazy. I never honestly thought
it's crazy. Priya was telling me, because we were talking about like what you take out of your house if there's a fire.
Yeah, and I remember in college when it happened, it was during COVID, but it was also online testing. And so I remember I literally took a midterm, like in a hotel room, we were evacuated. And you know how you had to have like the 10 camera setup to make sure you weren't cheating? I had to do
Just
that
Berkeley
in a
things.
hotel room.
It was a Berkeley thing because people would do anything to cheat.
I feel like CMU, all they did was send you the test via an email. You would just take it and then send it back.
Yeah, that was not our situation.
That's actually shocking to me. No, you had to have a back camera time lapse on your camera.
No
and
way.
you had to send in the time lapse.
Maya, the studio setup you see here is literally what it was.
Yeah, and you were like doing your CS problems.
That was the OG.
Well, speaking of UC Berkeley, there was a study done based on the housing prices, housing sizes, gentrification problem in California over the last 20 years from 2000 to 2020. And what they looked at was how these things were affected by the LA fires. They looked at control groups and then they looked at the neighborhoods where the fires were impacted. And the results are very fascinating. A couple of things that I think are counterintuitive is one, house prices went up, housing sizes went up, and they saw little to no effect to the gentrification problem. These fires have been 10 to 20x worse than previous fires in the past. But if you look at past data and that study, there's no reason to believe that there's going to be gentrification.
Those are talking about the 2018 fires, right?
No, it's talking about all fires throughout the last 20 years from 2000 to 2020.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
I also think people have like a sense of community, do want to rebuild in the area that they are.
Well, I actually disagree a little bit. Like, I think what you're saying about housing prices and stuff is true. I don't think housing prices going up necessarily means that gentrification didn't happen or that, like, everyone's going back. Because, like, I saw a case study of Paradise, California, where basically in the 2018 fires, it was, like, completely burned to the ground. And after 5 years, they saw that only a third of the population had returned, but, like, a significant portion of, like, 2/3 of the community, they definitely like suffered.
I intuitively would agree with you. And specifically this research, what they looked at to compare to see if there's gentrification is the average income and the median and the distribution over these neighborhoods before and after the fires, and they saw no difference. There's a couple of reasons this could happen. One that they cited is because, well, everyone's pretty wealthy, everyone could afford coming back. The second reason that they cited is that also wealthy individuals are sometimes not incentivized to come back because they don't want to deal with LA fires again. Research has been on both sides of this, but intuitively I would agree with you that it increases gentrification.
I also think like California property is just valuable.
Yeah.
Like regardless of where you are in California,
People love their beaches.
and people pay a premium to live in California. I think that the general idea is that over the course of the next like 10, 20 years, property values will rise so much that like any land that you can purchase in California, you should just get your hands on and build if possible.
With that being said, how did we get here? I think we should really dig into kind of like what's happened over the last 10 years to warrant fires of this size.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of big picture. Climate change has gotten a lot worse, which means that fire seasons are longer, and when things do happen, they're more extreme. And then also on a more localized level, there's a lot of mismanagement in California.
Yeah.
Like there are a lot of ways that you can prevent fires, although obviously it's difficult.
Yeah.
And some of them weren't taken like For example, you can do controlled burns where you like intentionally allow a fire to spread along like a smaller area. And this is like basically how Native Americans have been like handling the land in this area for like centuries.
Yeah, centuries. I mean, this is what they do in Grand Canyon, and for a little bit they actually stopped, and then they started doing again. It's because controlled burns are like highly politicized, because people in the Palisades don't want their like areas burned down.
Or like
Right
deal with
behind
the
their
smoke.
airline.
Exactly.
And
It's still a fire at the end of the day, right?
It's sad with things like this because politicians don't have aligned incentives, where if you're a politician that pushes forth controlled burns, right? Everyone's basically pissed at you because the air quality is bad, and it's not even because of an uncontrollable fire. It's a fire you created. It's a really easy headlines to be like, Mayor so-and-so like causes the AQI to be like 120, whatever, right? And so everyone's just pissed at you. And then it's not that like a future event happens. A future event doesn't happen, and no one's going to give you credit for it.
Well, so I think we're pretty aligned on the controlled burns part. And we also see this being practiced in other cities with similar rates of risk with fires, especially during their fire seasons. And it's something that they actively practice, and they haven't had a devastation like LA. And a couple places you can point to is like Austin, and you can also point to Victoria, Australia. The second thing that we wanted to bring up was also pre-deploying the firefighters. When the wind advisory was announced and everyone was told to be careful, something that you should be doing is deploying firefighters to more part of the regions. The LAFD, which is the fire department, maintains that they did do the best of their ability, but actually the former LAFD battalion chief, Rick Crawford, suggested that they could have done more and they could have pre-deployed while maintaining adequate city coverage.
Yeah, so adding on to that, the department chose to not keep about 1,000 firefighters on duty for a second shift as these winds continue to build, because these winds didn't just come out of nowhere. I remember even when I was home over the holidays, like it was really dry and it was really windy. So the Santa Ana winds are something that happen all the time. We should know how to deal with them. But in this situation, they only staffed 5 of more than 40 engines that were available for wildfire deployment. And so they weren't even prepared for a situation like this to happen.
Exactly. And then once the fire started, the LAFD increased pre-deployment measures. So basically, like, the reality is they did more as the fires got worse. So it means they could have done more from the beginning of the wind advisory.
It's also a resource shortage. California currently relies on inmates. They can't find enough firefighters. Like, there's 1,100 inmates that were fighting this fire, getting paid less than $1 an hour, which is really sad. And I think it shows how on every level California basically just mismanages everything.
The other thing is that they also saw, like, after the 2018 fires, they realized the problem in infrastructure where fire hydrants on hills don't have the proper infrastructure to pull water, essentially, because power gets turned off, and so you can't turn on the water pumps to pull that water. And so they haven't like fixed this issue, and they've had like 7 years now.
I actually think the insurance conversation is really interesting, and I want to go into it because basically what happened is there's these home insurance companies, and the government was like, you need to model how much you charge people based on empirical data. So if there's a house in a neighborhood, and based on the neighborhood, the house is predicted to get robbed once every 5 years, once every 50 years, whatever it might be. That is like what how your model decides what the price should be, which makes sense for all parties, right? But then there's a difficulty that comes into play with climate change, where basically now these home insurance companies need futuristic models that account for like exponential growth in things to decide the pricing. And like at first the government was like, you can't actually do that and just like increase pricing based on that. But then over time, the insurance companies were like, well, if you're not going to let us do that, then we're just going to pull out. And these like models that calculate how much climate change will affect insurance prices are actually super sophisticated. Like it's basically like a Versick, Analytics, Moody's, like tech companies are creating these models.
Yeah, no, they're good models. The thing is that because insurance is highly regulated, the government puts price ceilings. You're going to have shortages. People are going to pull out. The other thing is that I don't think these insurance companies also trust LA's infrastructure to fight these fires. People in similar risks of fires, like similar fire risk zones, still have insurance. And it's like, well, why doesn't LA have insurance? And like, I have to think that these insurance companies don't trust the LA infrastructure because they don't have tanks and they can't fight these fires. And it makes sense.
It's also probably like the rules around there being a ceiling on how much you can charge, right? And like,
so it's both the ceiling, it's both that 7% ceiling. It's also the fact they don't trust them to fight those fires.
Some progress has been made though, because in December of last year, they decided that this insurance modeling that like Moody's and stuff do can be incorporated now, but that in exchange, these insurance companies need to cover 85% of homes relative to like what they're covering in the rest of the state. So like if in another area of California you're covering 10 homes, then in like fire prone areas you need to cover 8.5 homes, but in exchange you can charge what you want.
Wait, but that 85% rule, you only have to increase by 5% every year. So you have to show you're just making progress.
Yeah, and I think there are some loopholes, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there are.
It's not like super enforced. I think people like to blame insurance companies for like pulling out, for all this devastation, but it's like policy didn't create a good environment for the insurance companies to succeed.
Yeah, and the state that we're in right now is that 3/4 of Californians are underinsured, and 36% of those are severely underinsured. So this means that you're covered for less than like 75% of your house. So let's say you had like a $4 million house that burned down. You just have to come up with like $1 million yourself.
The reason why all these people are uninsured as well is because when private insurance pulled out, California basically has the FAIR plan, which is like this bare bones policy that
it's honestly, it makes me laugh. Sorry, because it's falling apart. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's fallen apart because they have insured losses of roughly $40 billion and growing in this fire that just happened, but they only have less than $400 million in reserves. And so what can they do now? Like they can increase prices for consumers retroactively, which sucks. They can like get bailed out. This is almost like a bank bailout.
Yeah,
it is a bank bailout.
State bankruptcy of the program.
The other thing I wanted to bring up was like the site reservoir project, which is California's effort to build reservoirs after like the last 50 years for the first time.
This was so insane to read about.
And like they started this back in 2018 when the fire was bad, and they barely broke ground in the last year, and it's not going to be done until like 2032.
Well, when I was reading about it, it actually started even before 2018 because they had these plans for like the last 40 years. They're like, this would be a great area to build this in.
Yeah.
So then Prop 1 back in 2014 passed. And that was the first like real headwinds of like, okay, like let's get this show on the road. Let's actually do something about this. Mm-hmm. It was a $2.7 billion proposition for investment into water storage specifically for this project.
Yeah.
And we're nowhere.
Well, as a California native, I feel like I've always grown up hearing California's in a drought.
Wait, they limited the amount we're allowed to water our lawns.
Yeah, same. It's like yellow is the new green. Anyways, I digress. But what's really interesting about this story is that there's this law called CEQA, or CEQA. And essentially what it does, if I can like dumb it down, is that you can tie up any sort of infrastructure-based project in court if you say it's going to hurt the environment. Classic Californians. Like it's a very Californian thing for good reason.
To be fair, like it is like a kind of necessary policy. It's just like what it's become.
Exactly. And so all of these projects are essentially held up in court. Then to get site reservoirs kicked off, Newsom had to pass this policy called SB 149, which allows litigation process to be shortened to no more than 270 days. Essentially allows him to fast track any project that's being held up by this policy and that's like being held up by the court because you can't get a court date. And so he can just go hand pick and say, okay.
He's like, this is important enough.
Yeah, this isn't important enough, right? Even with this power, they're still not able to start this reservoir project. It's like, what is going on? I actually don't get it. I couldn't figure it out.
No, I actually don't know what it is because now they're saying it'll be delivered in the 2030s. And at the time of this, like even breaking ground, they were like, we know that this isn't enough. Like we're doing our best, but like this is all we can do right now.
I would say someone needs to light a fire under their asses, but that would not be an appropriate joke to make.
Dude,
that's shocking.
Deep end today.
Sorry.
And like this problem's only gonna get worse.
Yeah.
I honestly think that some of these areas more near where like the fire started are just gonna become inhabitable over time. And I think that that is like the future of climate change that we're gonna see.
But I like don't think that's true. Like I think that they are perfectly fine places if California actually had like the infrastructure in place. Like get rid of all the shrubs that exist there that are like dead and burned and are just fuel for the fire. Build with like the correct materials and like make sure you have water to put it out if something happens.
We have cities that show us that it's possible.
I don't know, because like at least from what I read, it seems like because the wind was so bad, there wasn't the ability to like use a lot of the air support that usually gets used.
That's true.
There was a University of Davis professor that basically said that like Southern California had access to enough water to make like every like square foot affected by the fire have like 20 feet of water in it. And the issue was just like lack of air support, how quickly the fire was spreading.
No, the issue was also the infrastructure, the inability
access to the water.
Like inability
we have water.
to get that water onto the fire was a hard part, which agreed is air support, but part of it is also these water pumps not having fire hydrants in like working in the hills.
But like the fire hydrants, from what I've read, are not sufficient, and like they'd optimized it would have helped a little bit, but it doesn't seem like it would be like result changing or answer
But there
changing.
were also houses like left standing that had been built with fire-proof materials. Like, I don't know if you guys have seen the videos of it, but it'll be like an entire street of like houses that were burned down and then one house standing because it was built correctly.
You can also have like sprinkler systems that actually like throw the water out. I don't know if you've seen, but people like would put hoses on their roofs, but there's actual sophisticated water systems that spray water outwards of your house, and you can set that up and you can have water piped to that. It's just that when power gets turned off, water pumps get turned off.
Yeah, but I think there's like two situations. One is like how the infrastructure could have been used better in the present. And then the second situation is like if you optimize the city for dealing with fires by like building with correct material and stuff. And I do think that would make a big difference. I just don't think it's like financially something that they're going to figure out.
Something I wanted to talk about is Trump, just because he's a good topic of conversation, argues that California lets all of its water go to the ocean.
Breaking news, guys.
Breaking news. And I want to debunk this myth on the pod with Anika.
I was telling Maya that this was a myth a few days ago. The fucking Delta smelt.
I got deep in the
Maya
Delta
got
smelt.
deep over this one podcast and the fact that like California was trying to save the Delta smelt.
Okay.
They are trying to save the Delta smelt.
Yeah.
Which, if you're wondering, is just a fish.
It's a 3-inch large fish. The environmentalists say that it's not really about the Delta smelt. It's about the salmon that you're trying to save. It's about the whales that you're trying to save as well.
It's not even the salmon. I feel like it's just like the ecosystem of it's basically in Northern California, Sacramento and San Joaquin have a delta that's basically like really ecologically significant.
Oh, and the smelt live in the delta.
The smelt, the salmon.
Yeah.
And it's like freshwater and saltwater meets there.
Okay. Yeah, and it's like freshwater from the mountains that are basically melting into the river.
And there's certain regulations that basically have some water directed there, I guess. And it's been shown that it's only like 1.2% more water that ends up in the Bay Area versus like other areas of California than if they like didn't do this ecological project. So it's not like
it's like you might as well.
The reason, yeah.
And it's highly politicized because it's in the Central Valley. And so Trump will obviously go on his platform, simplify the whole thing and be like, yeah, like California lets all this mountain water go to the ocean. That's not really true. Like all this water would never make it to LA, but it does make it to the Central Valley. And over there, Central Valley farmers really want access to this water.
Basically, Trump was saying there was like a valve that you could turn on of like water flowing from Northern California to SoCal that just like hadn't been turned on or something like that. It basically like doesn't have to do with the fires and has to do with like farming. Yeah. And it's just like a whole debate between how much you want to prioritize like the fact that obviously farmers need water, but it's so tough because like if we just sacrifice the environment at every turn now to optimize for the short term, we're going to get like even worse fires down the line. And that's the whole reason we're in this mess to begin with.
Yeah.
There's like instances of cities and stuff starting to sue like oil and gas companies that have just like ignored spills in the area. Mm-hmm. And like I think there's one court that even found them culpable.
Yeah. The reality of the situation is that there was enough water in the LA area. People just couldn't get access to that water. The fires were spreading too fast, and it was really hard to fly planes above the area to go and dump that water.
So while we're debunking things, can we talk about the tunnels that are under LA?
Oh my God.
Basically, there's a conspiracy that the reason why the Getty didn't burn down is because it's like where all the underground LA tunnels meet. And if you're not chronically online like we are, the idea is that there's like tunnels under LA and there's even like a Starbucks in these tunnels.
Yeah.
And it's a way for celebrities.
People have come out and said they worked in the Starbucks underground. I don't know if you guys
people
have seen
being a
those
random
videos.
TikToker. But
Okay. I was gonna say I don't really believe that. But
no,
go
like,
ahead.
I mean, it's definitely not true.
Put on your tinfoil hat. Go ahead.
Yeah, and okay, it actually is kind of crazy because like with P. Diddy getting arrested and everything happening, everyone was like, everything is gonna come out now. And so people were posting that the fires were set to like destroy evidence of the tunnels in like certain areas where like shady shit was going down.
Oh my God.
Okay, anyway, obviously like this isn't true, but I was deep in the TikTok rabbit hole about these tunnels of LA, and I feel like there are tunnels that run under like every single city.
Really?
Yeah. Well, especially from like war times and stuff like that. Like underground bunkers that were built and tunnels.
That makes sense.
And so there is some interconnectedness.
If you're gonna build tunnels anywhere, I'd take them under LA. The traffic makes me so angry.
And you don't even drive.
And I don't even live there.
So that wraps up our story on the LA fires. I know that the fires have affected a lot of people in LA, and being from SoCal, it is really devastating to see what's happening there. I do think that the city has come together in a lot of really positive ways. So that's really awesome to see. And I really hope all the wildfires get cleared up soon, because it has been almost a month now. But yeah, moving on to our next segment that Maya has planned for us today.
Yes, so we are starting a new segment on the pod. As you know, our podcast is called Get the Check, and this segment is called Businesses That Shouldn't Get the Check.
It's good.
Yeah.
I like it.
Wait, I feel kind of sad because Maya was waiting to tell us the name of the segment all week.
Wait, I think it's a good name. Like, it's not like a funny name, so I'm not gonna laugh. Like,
I thought it was
it's
so
good.
genius. I actually thought
No,
it was like
it's
so
good.
funny.
No, it is good.
It's like what I actually thought that you were going to say that. Like, I had this thought already.
So we're starting a new segment on the pod. For some of our earlier listeners, we used to have Restaurant Pick of the Week. I don't really know what we were doing there, but
We've iterated.
yeah. And we're back with a better segment. The new segment is called Businesses That Wouldn't Get Our Check. And it's not about restaurants. It's about companies.
So this week we're talking about JaaS.
Job referrals as a service, which is a new and budding industry.
There's this platform called Refer Me where candidates can basically post their profile, ask for like, I want referrals to XYZ company, post their resume, give a little blurb. It's essentially LinkedIn plus adding companies that you want to work for.
Yeah, it was actually kind of crazy. It was literally like full stack software engineer, 2 years of experience, Amazon, Google, Facebook. Like, it was so funny.
Wait, I was gagged when I was looking at this website. I was like, congrats, like you basically made free Ashby.
What?
Oh, never mind this. Okay.
Wait, can you explain the reference?
Oh, well, Ashby is like a recruiting service.
Oh, did you use it?
Well, everyone uses it.
It's just like where you submit job
Oh,
applications. Basically, you pay $12 a month for Refer Me, and then you can get referrals to any company you want, like any big company that you want.
I'm not gonna lie, I know some of our friends that would eat that up.
Yeah, I mean, individually it would make sense for you. But as a business model, I don't see this actually lasting.
Well, someone made like $30,000 off of it. I feel like from the perspective of an employee and the perspective of a job applicant, I see the value add, but the company just really stands to lose.
Yeah, because the way you think about it is, why do referrals work? Referrals work because employees are tapping into networks that recruiters can't get, right? And so you have an individualized network that is better than the recruiter because you have these connections. Now when you take the essence of that away and basically every single person is kind of looking at the same applicants, the only thing that you're benefiting off of is if the employee who's referring these people is good at screening applications. At that point, they're just becoming a pseudo recruiter. And so then it's like, at that point, once it becomes easy to become a pseudo recruiter, the amount that companies pay for these bonuses will go down. It's just a business model that doesn't last. Sure, in the short to medium term, there's individuals that stand to profit off of it, but at any sort of scale, it won't work.
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen this. Like, most companies don't give you referral bonuses for any new grad offer. And that's because, like, you're literally coming out of college. Anyone can refer anyone you want. It's, like, basically doesn't mean anything. And so it makes sense.
Yeah. But I was actually thinking about this further because I was, like, shitting on it. And then I was like, honestly, there's just like some developer out there, maybe a couple of developers out there that made this like website. It's not a hard website to code up, right? It doesn't need to be like $1 billion.
Not this again. Anytime we cover a company, whether it's Refer Me, where it's more understandable, or it's Scale AI, which is worth like $14 billion, Maya's like, oh yeah, I feel like I could have coded this up myself. In a non-VC backed world, I think this company is fine because, at least for now, referrals still do have value at tech companies. In fact, like, you almost need a referral in some ways now to get past like the huge stack of resumes.
Yeah.
And
wait, for our job applications, like there's like 9,000 positions for some of our like new grad roles. It's insane.
9,000 applicants, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, 9,000 applicants for a new grad.
English is hard.
English is really hard for me. Go ahead.
No, that's crazy.
Also, new grad jobs right now are really hard too.
Yeah,
like the industry's tough.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I think that's part of this conversation too, which is like people are so desperate that they're willing to pay for referrals.
Yeah.
And I feel like I would honestly pay like $40 to be referred to a company I really liked if I didn't know anyone at all. Like,
Yeah.
But does that actually mean that you'll get an interview these days? Like, I feel like that's
no, but I could see how if someone's been interviewing for like 6 months.
you might as well try.
Yeah.
Like $12 is a really
Sure.
small price to play to try.
Sure, but you could also reach out to people on LinkedIn. Like, that's why platforms like that exist. And, like, maybe you don't want to put in the effort to do it, and it's more worth it for you to just, like, pay the $12 and get referred by someone random. But I actually do think that, like, it is just you being lazy and not reaching out to people.
Okay, but let's say you're applying to like 200 companies in a job recruiting process, and 50 of them are on Refer Me. Why not just pay Refer Me $12?
Yeah.
Get referrals for those 50 and then start reaching out to the other 150. Like, it's not like you can just reach out to someone on LinkedIn. Like, you have to reach out to so many people.
Yeah, that's true. But
Get
what's
on
the
a
rate
call.
on Refer Me? What's the rate of people getting referred?
I don't know. They definitely don't release those
Yeah, like,
stats.
but that's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like we don't actually know how successful it is at matching people.
I feel like $12 is a small price to play. Like
That's
when you're like thinking about it from like
ROI perspective.
Yeah, ROI
of what your
perspective.
salary would be.
yeah, there's also like tons of men these days that sign up for Grace Hopper because like
Oh my
Grace
God, I
Hopper,
know.
you basically can't
Exclude
exclude
people. You can't exclude people.
Yeah, and so like
I
Grace
thought it was
Hopper
a
is just like
woman's thing.
it was meant to be a woman's thing, and now there's
but now it's like MEI.
yeah, so they'll pay like a couple $1,000s to go to Grace Hopper, and then they'll just look for jobs
instead
there
of getting it for free.
instead of getting it
which
for
is
free.
what the girls get it.
Yeah,
There's like obviously like scholarships that you can like get paid to go to Grace Hopper for, but like some girls also just pay to go.
It's
like,
Girls pay thousands of dollars.
yeah, it's the price of recruiting.
Grace Hopper, like it is a conference exclusively for women to like make sure that there's like more women in tech, like promote all of that, and it is really good, but it's also like a huge recruiting fair.
Yeah.
And so they'll do interviews on site at Grace Hopper. Just like objectively, like these interviews are shorter processes than what you would have to go through if you went through like a traditional recruiting.
Well, that's like across every industry and all diversity hiring. Because like I went to a lot of the investment banking diversity like 3-day things the banks would hold when I was like a sophomore and a junior. And like the interview is intentionally easier. I feel fine saying that.
Yeah, but now there's like men because they know they're like, oh, these women are only getting in through things like Grace Hopper, and like Grace Hopper won't say no to people. So it's just these like Indian boys that are going to Grace Hopper, doing the interviews and getting the jobs instead of like who they're.
But I
meant
don't
to
get
be.
it because like if you're at a women's conference and you're interviewing and a man comes, aren't you like you're weird?
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean, it's just like the price of recruiting at this point. It's like worth to sink some amount of money in.
Even in other ways, like interview processes have gotten so long. A lot of times you'll like shadow someone at a job and they'll just like pay your salary for a day before they hire you. Like the entire job recruiting process, I feel like has just gotten really competitive.
Well, yeah, I just see it as like the job recruitment process evolving with technology.
I also think they've paused hiring at a lot of companies. Not that they're laying people off,
Yeah.
but they want to see how they can use all of these tools to improve efficiency internally with like who they have, as opposed to like hiring people that they might in the future then have to lay off.
Yeah.
Which I do think makes sense as an approach with like how technology is moving.
Yeah.
But it is just like an unfortunate reality.
I mean, job recruiting is always going to be a problem. It's just like what competitive advantage do you have against your competitors to like essentially hire and recruit better and faster? It's basically the scale of quality versus how much time you're going to spend.
Yeah, that all makes sense. Well, I love the new segment, Maya, of companies that we wouldn't write a check for despite us not having any checks to write at the moment.
I see it in our future.
That wraps up today's episode. Next week, we are going to be talking to Daniel, who's one of the co-founders of GenTrace, which is an LLM eval platform. Our first interview episode came out last week, and we had a lot of fun doing it. We hope you guys enjoyed it too. And so we're excited for our second one to come out.
Yeah. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.